Alright, so today we're going to go over some movement patterns. Now these movement patterns are super crucial, and they're the foundation of our entire exercise routine that we could add in after that. So the first thing that we want to do is get what some people would call a neutral spine. I hate using the term neutral spine, and I have a lot of hard times with these terms because you go to one gym and they'll tell you a neutral spine is one thing, and then you go to another gym and they'll tell you it's something completely different. So my entire approach to exercise and activity is based off of the way that infants move. Now, me personally, I ruptured a disc in my lower back about 6 years ago, and I was already a chiropractor. I played football in college. I had trainers watching me. I felt like I knew my stuff when it came to exercise and recovery, and I still ruptured a disc, and I had a lot of back pain, sciatic pain going all the way down to the leg, and it lasted for about 6 months to a year. And luckily for me, when this was all going down for me, my first son, Cole, he started walking at that time. And what I noticed in him was that I didn't move in any way similar to the way that he moved. He actually moved more like a gymnast would, and I moved like an average American would. And what we tend to see is that infants and gymnasts have very mobile hips. They rely a lot on their big butts to do a lot of their motion and move them around throughout life. The average American, on the other hand, we spend so much time sitting that we lose a lot of our hip mobility, and therefore we end up noticing knee irritation and injury. Now, if we look at infants move, what you'll notice is they haven't been taught any bad habits yet. They don't really know how to move other than what they feel is the right way to move around throughout this world. And what you'll notice in them is that they sit there with their butt stuck out a little bit, just like this. They have what's called a lordosis. That curve in the lower back there is very valuable, and they'll actually walk around kind of like this, right? They move a lot in their hips here as opposed to their leg coming forward and slouching in the back. So they have all this motion in their hips, which if you look at the anatomy in, say, a cadaver, if you were to look at the anatomy of a human body, the hips here are ball and socket joints, just like our shoulders, and they have so much dynamic range of motion that's really a crime when we start limiting our hip motion, right? We start limiting our shoulder and hip motion, we become very immobile very quickly. So again, you think of these infants and they walk around like this. They bend over, they pick something up, and their heels are right on the ground. They come all the way down and they scoop it all the way in close to their body like this, and they come all the way up, and then they'll carry it over. They don't twist and look at us. They will rotate in the neck because the neck does primary rotation, just like this. And then they'll pivot and they'll turn to you, to their parent, and then they'll turn back like this. And then in order to put it down, they don't bend over this way and drop it down. They will very slowly squat back down, place it down, and then come up and move on with their life. And one instance in particular, when my son started going up the stairs, is when they went up the stairs, they would step up a stair, and when they'd squat back, their butt would go so far behind the stair below them that they looked like they would fall back. Like if you ever had kids and you see your children go up the stairs for the first time, it's concerning because they look like if an adult were to do that, they would fall down the stairs. And we don't want that, obviously, right? We don't want the kids falling down the stairs. So when they come up and their butt's way back like that, and then they are able to lift up because they've got so much mobility and strength in their butts here, and then they lift up and they do it again. I mean, that just goes to show how restricted the average adult is and how strong and mobile the average child is. So when we look at children, they really give us a great foundation and a great education as to how the human body should move and what its potential should be. All right, so let's start with some movement patterns that are foundational to our exercise routines as we get older. Now, a lot of these seem simple, but when done properly are very challenging. And what that shows us is that we as adults have gone to the gym. We do a lot of our heavy, pretty muscle lifting, but yet we forget about strengthening our foundation. And what children do is, in order to move, they need that foundation strong and sturdy in order to build off of it, right? It's like a nice strong concrete foundation as opposed to a jelly type of layering of a foundation. So what we really need to do, and what we do with all of our patients at the office, is we focus on the foundational movement patterns first. And the first one is developing a nice, steady, healthy foundation of the pelvic floor. And that's found by taking the pelvis and rolling it slightly forward. You're going to feel like your butt's stuck out a little bit, because nowadays we walk around with our butts tucked under us all the time. That just the mere fact of getting our tailbone slightly elevated makes us feel like we're walking around with our butt way the heck out there, and it feels awkward to us. But what we need is a nice, steady, subtle tilt of the pelvis to help really give us a strong foundation. And what you'll find is that you're more balanced and in more control over your motions when the hips are mobile here with that tilt there. Now, if we're here in this position with that tilt in the hips, we should be able to maintain that spinal position. So from here to there is in one position, and it stays in that position during all of the rest of our motion that's done by the ball and socket joints. So let's look at that and what that looks like. So I'm here in a slouch position. I take the pelvis, I imagine it's a bucket, I pour it out, I can fill it up, and I pour the pelvis out. My spine is nice and steady. My shoulder blades are they're not really forced retracted, but they're sitting back and down. And what you'll notice with that is when I'm here and I shift my hips back, my shoulders will actually sit back down nice and comfy. So I'm here, all right? And then what you'll notice is that I can then squat down and my spine stays in essentially that same position. It never moves. It never flexes forward or anything. So when I'm here, it comes down, and right around here, my butt starts to tuck a little bit. So that's the point that I need to start focusing on more glute or hip mobility. I need to become even longer and stretchier in the hips. So let's look at that, right? So we've got that pelvic position, that nice stable foundation. We start squatting down, then we can come on up. If I have to bend over to pick anything up, if you notice that lordosis or that lumbar curve is still there, and my butt goes out and that curve stays there. As my butt goes out, I'm loading up the hips here, that curve stays there. The spine is still in the same position as it was when erect. The only thing that's moving is the hips here. So I could squat down, spine in the same position. I can bend over, spine's in the same position. Let's look at the difference between bending at the back and pivoting at the hips. So I scoop everything up here and I come up and my spine is still stationary. It's not moving much. All right, so that alone is walking around on 2 feet, picking stuff up, and how valuable that nice, steady, stable spine is during all of those activities. Now, how do we ever get there? Because at first, humans don't walk around on 2 feet. They are on the ground. And when we're on the ground, we develop a lot of these healthy movement patterns that are the foundation to get us into this ability to start moving around better on our 2 feet. So let's get on the ground and show you. All right, so when I'm on the ground here, what a lot of infants do, or what all infants do, is when they're on the ground, they are on their bellies here in tummy time. So they're here, and if you notice, this position here gives us that nice curve in the lower back. They'll actually sit there, infants do, and we'll lift the legs up and go side to side like this, giving some nice strength to that extension of the lower back. And believe it or not, infants, when they are born, have no curves of the spine. When we are adults, we have a cervical curve that's healthy for us. We have a lumbar or lower back curve that's healthy for us. And in this position here is when we develop the neck curve. The neck curve develops from this position here. So this gives us good strength over the weight of our head and the lower back. Now, the weight of our head as infants is 33% of their entire body weight. And just by doing this here alone gives us good strength over that huge head. It weighs 10 pounds when we grow up. So we want to have good control over this head. The next thing they do is they will actually start rolling. Infants will be on their bellies and then they'll roll onto their back. And what that rolling does is it coordinates the shoulders together contralaterally and on the same side. So when I roll, the goal is to keep the hip and the shoulder moving in unison with each other. Now, the more we roll and keep the shoulder and the hip moving together, the less likely we're going to experience excessive rotation of the lower back spine and further injury. So infants spend an entire few months rolling from side to side, re-coordinating or initially coordinating the way in which the shoulders and the hips will move together. After they do that, they end up on all fours, which is a common position for a lot of people to exercise their core in. Now, when we exercise our core, we tend to forget the rolls, and we don't do the rolls much, which should always be done prior to getting on our hands and knees. But hands and knees is a common position for a lot of our basic PT-ish type exercises to start in. And when we're on our hands and knees, we should be able to look up, like I'm looking up at the camera. I should be able to see my parents above me. A lot of adults, we are too restricted in our spine and too tight in the hips that we are actually hunched over like this, and we are unable to look up at our parents. We should be able to have that, again, that lower back curve there in our lower back and their head up. Shoulders should be back, and we should be able to be in this position here. Now when infants are here, before they actually start crawling, they'll start rocking back and forth. They'll rock with their toes in the ground like so, and they will also rock with their feet flat against the ground. Now this motion is very valuable in establishing hip mobility and coordination. This is the kind of the basis of being able to get up onto 2 feet, because without hip mobility here and coordination in our butts, we are very likely unable to be up here and be able to stay stable from side to side up on 2 feet. So when we are on our hands and knees, we want to be able to rock back and forth, and we can even go side to side to loosen those hip rotators. Okay, after that, we get into our final movement pattern prior to walking, and this is the basis of our locomotive walking pattern, and that is crawling. When we are on all fours here and we lift the left leg and the right arm up at the same time to crawl forward, that tightens the core in the X. Probably one of the most significant movement patterns and exercises that you can do to help give yourself a strong core, believe it or not, is crawling. Crawling helps tie the X of the body together. If you were to look at me as an X from left leg to right arm, this X gets tightened together by crawling. So when we crawl, we should not go side to side like most adults do. Most adults will be restricted here with a rounded back, and then when they crawl, their knee will have to come midline to compensate for the lack of stability in the X. So they will actually crawl out and forward, and then they will crawl like that, and their hips will sway from side to side. If you ever think back, if you had a child, to your little baby crawling over to the electrical outlet, he's crawling nice and like a train, just like boom, 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 right straight ahead, not moving or swaying from side to side. You don't see the hips going from side to side. He's going on a mission to get to wherever he wants to go. Now, when you tie all that together and you've got a nice steady foundation of hips, they will start getting up onto their 2 limbs here. Now, when they're on their 2 limbs, their 2 legs, again, they have that nice, steady, healthy butt, and they will start walking around like this. But first, they need to start developing some sense of stability while on their 2 legs. So they start out like this, and believe it or not, they will start swaying from side to side. As they walk, they will start shifting their weight over to one leg as opposed to the other, and what happens is they become more coordinated on that one hip. And as they walk, they will become more steady, their feet will start narrowing, and then they'll be able to walk ahead. When they take their first steps, they actually are very wobbly and kind of go side to side, and that's their hips here doing the work and finding out where a nice balance is to get them moving. All right, then they get to running, and running is again a more intense version of walking, right? Because as we're ahead on one leg at a time, we really have got to develop some good stability in those hips. Now those are super, super valuable foundational exercises we give to all of our patients when they're ready for them, but they should always be done prior to any sort of exercise that you're doing. I mean, the foundation of our movement patterns are so crucial that if you are unable to do any of these right here, then why are you doing any other exercise? These are the foundation. It's kind of like taking a child that can't walk yet and throwing them into the gym and telling them to go lift heavy weights. That would be ridiculous. Ridiculous. You need to be strong in the foundation first before you can build on top of it.